The word monster comes from the Latin term monstrum, and a monster, etymologically speaking, is a sign, a warning. It is something that is hideous and abhorrent. It is something that exists only in its uniqueness. It doesn't belong to any existing category of species or kind. So the characteristic of the monster is that there is no other creature like it. Every monster is singular. If you watch the film, the Pixar film Monsters Inc., you will have seen that every single monster in Monsters Inc. looks different from any other monster. So this is very much the principle and the etymology of monstrosity. Now, the most famous monster in cultural history and in the history of literature, at least in modern times, is probably Frankenstein's creature. So the imaginary monster invented by the novelist Mary Shelley in 1818 in this text here. Frankenstein. What I'd like to discuss with you today is how this figure of the monster in Frankenstein functions as an extremely ambivalent signifier, which both attracts a series of conflicting interpretations and decenters the idea of the human. So the monster is a troubling figure because it makes us worry about that which makes us, or which we believe makes us human. The first way to approach this problem is to look at the subtitle of Shelley's text, which is The Modern Prometheus. The myth of Prometheus is one of the important foundation myths of classical antiquity. It's a Greek myth, and Prometheus is a titan who rebels against the gods and who, by creating human beings, and is punished for this rebellion by being chained to Mount Atlas and being tormented in the intention of the gods for eternity. Hercules subsequently comes and frees Prometheus. But when we talk about the myth of Prometheus, we talk about a creation myth. So we have a creator figure, Prometheus, and we have its creation, the humans, according to this myth. In the novel Frankenstein, the modern Prometheus, the scientist Frankenstein is, of course, the equivalent of Prometheus, and the creature, therefore, surprisingly, perhaps sort of worryingly for us as readers, corresponds to the human. But we have in the first lines of this text, we have a further reference to a different important reference and archetype, which is Paradise Lost, Milton. And the line from Paradise Lost in the preface to Frankenstein reads, "Did I request thee, maker, from my clay to mold me man? Did I solicit thee from darkness to promote me?" As you may know, Paradise Lost is John Milton's version of the creation, of the biblical creation myth of the book of Genesis. So it's the story of the creation of Adam, but it's also it's also the story of Satan's rebellion against God. And Satan is in fact the dark romantic antagonist, but also the key figure, and according to some, even the hero of Milton's text. So when we look at that triangle of God, Satan, and man in the biblical creation myth, which is evoked by this reference to Milton, we immediately realize that something um, unsettling happens when we try and make sense of this triangle in relation to Mary Shelley's story, because we have a binary in this story. We have the creator, Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein, the scientist, and we have the creation, the monster. And if we try and map this triangle onto the binary, what happens is, of course, that we can only ever focus on one side of the triangle. So we can, if we imagine the creature as Satan, indeed the creature is at various points compared to a devil, then we can imagine the scientist as the human, which is being tempted by the creature, tempted by power. But then what falls away from the novel, well, there's no room in the novel for the divine. If we imagine the Frankenstein as the godlike creator, and we imagine the creature as his creation, so we work along the sort of binary of the human and the divine, then there is no room in this novel for evil. So whatever, however we try and make sense of this Miltonian model, of this biblical model, there is always, in a sense, a troubling absence. Now, this idea of a troubling absence, this idea of a singularity, is also very much foregrounded in the text by the way Mary Shelley describes the monster. And indeed, the monster has no name. Notoriously, it speaks for itself, but it doesn't use a name to present itself. And when it is mentioned in the text, the text is largely Frankenstein's narrative. When it is mentioned in the text by Frankenstein, it is described with various terms as a devil, an enemy, a fiend, a monster precisely, a creature, and some of these are more directly derogatory terms. Some of these are more sort of clearly efforts to define the monster in terms of radical evil, in terms of absolute otherness. Some of these are terms which simply emphasize the fact that it is man-made. So a creature is not perhaps by in itself a negative term, whereas an enemy or a fiend is an antagonist, and a devil is a sort of representation of absolute evil. So again, we have this kind of sort of sense of some something which we cannot quite pin down. I'd like to say something else now about how this uncertainty, how this lack of a clear sense of identity serves to challenge a particular understanding of the human. And for this, I would like to focus in particular on one scene of the novel, which is not the creation scene. It's not the scene where Frankenstein first sees the creature, and it's not the long central part of the novel modeled on Rousseau's theory of the noble savage, where the monster gains awareness of itself. And it's not even the final showdown in the Arctic where the monster tries to escape from Frankenstein. Frankenstein chooses to sort of chase it and hunt it down for revenge, but also in his mind to undo this terrible error of that he made by creating the monster. The scene that I would like to comment on very briefly now occurs in the central part of the novel, and it's the first meeting of the creature and its creator after that long period of separation. So Frankenstein brings the creature into being. The creature escapes after realizing that it terrifies Frankenstein. Frankenstein wakes half asleep, sees these eyes staring at him, and runs away. And the creature likewise runs away, escapes from him, and when they meet again, much later, the creature has learned master human language has gained an awareness of itself. It is also understood that it is abhorrent. And what it proposes to Frankenstein is a deal, is a pact. Of course, when we think of a pact, again, we think of the pact, the famous Faustian pact with the devil. But what the creature here proposes is also its own hope to become something much more like a new species. No longer a monster, no longer a singularity, but somebody who can actually procreate, who can live in a community. The creature says to Frankenstein, make a female companion. God made a female companion for Adam. Every animal has a female companion of its own kind, even the most base and wretched of animals. Why do I not have a female companion? Why did you make me as a monster, something which stands alone? And Frankenstein is initially moved by this appeal and believes that the appeal may be justified and begins to build a female creature. But then he's suddenly tormented by doubt, and in a moment of sort of extreme regret, he destroys this inanimate female body. At this point, the monster is angry. The monster becomes a murderer, and until the end of the novel, the monster will take revenge for this terrible second extreme harm that that Frankenstein has perpetrated on the monster. And I'm just going to read you Frankenstein's reflection here, where he thinks, what would happen if I created a female companion? He says, they might even hate each other. The creature who already lived loathed his own deformity, and might he not conceive a greater abhorrence for it when it came before his eyes in the female form? She might also turn with disgust from him to the superior beauty of man. She might quit him, and he be again alone, exasperated by the fresh provocation of being deserted by one of his own species. Even if they were to leave Europe and inhabit the deserts of the New World, yet one of the first results of those sympathies for which the demon thirsted would be children, and a race of devils would be propagated upon the earth, who might make the very existence of the species of man a condition precarious and full of terror. Had I a right for my own benefit to inflict this curse upon everlasting generations? I had before been moved by the sophisms of the being I had created. I had been struck senseless by his fiendish threats, but now, for the first time, the wickedness of my promise burst upon me. I shuddered to think that future ages might curse me as their pest, whose selfishness had not hesitated to buy its own peace at the price, perhaps, of the existence of the whole human race. What happens here is that Frankenstein ponders two different possibilities. The first possibility is that the male and female creature might not actually be attracted to one another, but might be disgusted by each other's image. But the second, which turns out in Frankenstein's mind to be even more worrying, is that they might be attracted to each other, that they might have children. The creature promises that it would move very far away to Patagonia, which for Mary Shelley was very, very far away, and that they would live there without ever entering into contact with humans, meaning civilized, in inverted commas, European human beings. But Frankenstein understands that what he would actually create is not simply a monster, but a new species, what he calls a race of devils. So, and this race might in some ways be of greater physical strength than human beings, and it might interfere with the future of the human race, and it might interfere with the actual survival of the human race. The monsters might be stronger and might ultimately lead to the extinction of the human race. So what we have here, very interestingly, this is written prior to Darwin's work on the origin of the species. But what we have here is already a kind of sort of an uncertain awareness of humanity no longer as a divine creation that whose existence coexists with the whole span of history as sort of meaningful, divinely ordained time. We have the idea, the modern secular idea of humanity as a biological species, and this new species of monsters existing alongside it. So this is, if you wish, an apocalyptic vision, not a similar to the apocalyptic vision that Mary Shelley herself would develop in her later work, The Last Man, but very much unlike the religious apocalyptic visions that we find in the biblical tradition, beginning with the book of Revelation. So this is an apocalyptic vision which decenters the human. It's no longer the singular presence of the monster as a stumbling block, as an uncanny stranger, but it's the idea of a different species which might take the space of the human species, at the center of a world which is no longer imagined simply to exist as a meaningful, divinely created habitat for human beings.